Obadiah and turn it over to him. Obadiah.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. Sounds like this is coming across okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for prioritizing this over finishing up your lunch conversations. Glad you all could make it. We have an excellent panel here of three folks. One of the folks who was on the agenda had to cancel, so we should have plenty of time for Q&A. So please, as we're going along, please write down some tough questions for our panelists. And before we get going with them, I'm going to tee up a couple of thoughts from SMUD's perspective on the space. So I'll step into that now. So at SMUD, we're in the midst, as many utilities are, of this transition from demand response to virtual power plants and trying to figure out what exactly that means, what these services are going to look like that we have to deliver. We are looking at about a 6x growth in electric vehicles over the next 6 years. We have about 50,000 EVs on the road today. That should be about 300,000 by 2030. As well, we're looking at a pretty massive scale up of behind the meter storage in our forecast. 50x growth is what our forecast says, so a lot of uncertainty there of how much we'll be able to see scale and be able to tap into. As well as a lot of questions about how much of the EV fleet will be able to engage for managed charging or vehicle to grid. But with all of that out there, we're forecasting as much as maybe 1,000 megawatts, probably non-coincident, of new controllable loads beyond what we now have of just a few hundred megawatts of demand response potential for our 3,000 megawatt peak utility. The drivers, as we're thinking about what these virtual power plants need to be able to deliver, include a very rapid pace of expansion of our distribution system, which we expect to exceed our current staffing capacity, and looking at the amount of time it takes to train up new staff is going to be a significant factor beyond just the cost of avoiding that infrastructure, but actually being able to ramp up and meet it may create some political pressure on utilities in general that VPPs could help alleviate. We also, as we're reaching towards our zero carbon plan for 2030, expect to make some pretty massive investments in bulk energy storage at fairly high costs for that resource. So we're interested in thinking about ways to avoid some of that. And we're also in this process of shifting kind of from the planning value around resource adequacy and delivering demand response to avoid resource adequacy into one where virtual power plants are providing a much more diverse set of planning and operational values, both on the bulk and distributed side. So I thought I would just share with you some of the questions on my mind as a DER strategy person thinking about this virtual power plant space as we head into our panel. So some of the gaps and questions that we're trying to resolve to design the quote unquote right virtual power plant for our portfolio. First off, as we're currently tackling RA, we're hearing that RA may not be our problem, or at least peak RA may not be our problem in 2030. We may be awash in bulk battery storage, and it may be being deployed to deliver other grid services other than shaving our peak. So what are those requirements to displace bulk storage in the supply portfolio? Really getting much more specific on what the modeling is telling us in our resource planning process to understand those requirements. In the operational space, what are the highest value operational services and associated requirements? How can we forecast those out in time and understand that value really well? What are the operational constraints associated with a future where our electricity distribution system is much more utilized by electric vehicles charging at optimal times? We expect overall grid utilization is going to go up. That's going to create less flexibility for DERs to deliver bulk services. So how can we predict what that's going to look like spatially and in aggregate? What are the costs associated with accessing these distributed energy resources for different operational needs? also considering the requirements in the operational space. This is going to be really critical for understanding cost effectiveness. It may well be cheaper to build some of that bulk storage instead of pursuing virtual power plants if we have to deliver real-time telemetry at a residential scale into our power system operations or DERM systems. The next question down there is how do we create both investment and operational savings confidence for customers to be able to participate reliably over time? So, oftentimes customers are investing against our retail rate structure. Those retail rates, our time of use rate, which 98% of customers have, is apparently off the table for considering changes for our next rate process and probably the one after that, just based on the difficulty of changing everyone to a new paradigm. So customers get pretty locked in on those rates, and expectations get developed around investments and paybacks for customers that make it difficult to make changes to those rates. But those rates also set kind of the benchmark for us of what it's going to cost us to move someone from, a rate arbitrage point of view into an active virtual power plant engagement, which may not fully align with those rate structures. And then lastly, how many devices are really needed to achieve reliable grid services at the transformer level, the substation level, the bulk system level, as we look at these different operational requirements and look through time across the year at the availability of the resource. So we have a lot of questions that we're working to answer on our strategy team and working with the operations and planning teams to answer. And I think we've got a panel today that's got a lot of insights into. I'm looking forward to learning some things and hopefully learning some things from the audience as well as we get into the Q&A. So I'm going to transition now to Angela's.
So can everybody hear me okay? I might move this up a little bit. I want to apologize that I'm really a person who pays attention to detail, and I really am into this new font called, I think it's called Apatos, and it doesn't show up on this computer. So they had to convert my PowerPoint into a PDF. But so that's why my format looks a little odd. So first I want to thank Lawrence Berkeley National Lab for allowing me to participate in this project and present today on behalf of them. We're working on a project with U.S. Department of Energy, sponsored out of the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, and I'll talk about that project in a little bit. My name is Angela Long. I have been in the industry for over 15 years in the DER strategy and planning portion of this work, and I will take that lens in my presentation. So back when I started 15 years ago, we really thought about DERs just in terms of energy efficiency, and that resource was really focused on customer programs, customer satisfaction, but not necessarily how you integrate DERs into your planning. So if you were a utility, you might have an energy efficiency program where you would quantify savings and from energy and capacity. You might use that to decrement your load forecast with energy efficiency, but you didn't really start to think about it beyond that. You didn't think about using energy efficiency as the distribution asset for non-wire solutions, but that's all changing now. As we have an increase in DERs and the types of DERs that are on the system are changing, it's really causing this need to modernize the grid and modernize our planning processes. And I think that connection between the increase of DERs and how that's changing utility planning is really important. So today we're asking questions like, should we take solar and decrement it off our load forecast, or we build supply side, should we build supply curves and have it compete as a supply side resource? How should we start to integrate energy storage into our integrated resource plans or into our distribution system plans? What are the planning inputs that we need to do that? Where does it live in terms of planning and analytics? What type of potential studies do we do? Do we do locational forecasting at the distribution level down at the feeder? Or do we do it at the system wide level and just decrement DERs off the load forecast? That change of thinking about DER as a planning input is really leading us to start to think about what kind of needs can DER solve and what kind of solutions can they provide. And I just think, you know, VPPs are really hot and sexy right now, but we started off with DERs and non-wire solutions. I mean, we've been doing this for a really long time. I think what's different is VPPs is what will be that will help us modernize and transform the grid, because it's going to give us that visibility and controllability into the system, but it's also going to allow our grid operators to actually control these devices real time. And I think if VPPs can do that, then we can truly unlock the value that DERs provide beyond just energy and capacity or flexibility, to start to think about utilizing DERs as a way to look at resiliency or to help with decarbonization goals. So that's why VPPs matter. That's why they're important, because they finally allow us to aggregate DERs, which alone are too small to be able to maximize their value. But in aggregate, if we can bring them together, we can start to unlock the full potential of these DERs and go beyond having energy and capacity and flexibility to start utilizing them like a traditional power plant. But they're not like a traditional power plant. They're owners of data. They're conductors of data. They're the Ubers, I guess, of the utility resource mix. They're transporting information and data across the system. And we also have the ability to place them in a lot of different places across the grid where you wouldn't be able to do large supply side resources. So now they contribute to things like equity. If you did a targeted DER program, you could put them in areas where you have vulnerable communities and be able to provide ancillary benefits like air pollution, or be able to reduction in emissions and air quality. So you have this ability to start to maximize DERs in a way that you haven't before. And I think that that's, in my mind, what makes VPPs different. And I think also with VPPs, what's interesting is depending on you as a utility, if you're in the utility industry, VPPs can have a different use case for you. They could be helping you meet your decarbonization or clean energy transition. They could be helping you provide resiliency and reliability, like Portland General Electric did use them for when they had a 116-degree heat wave. You could use it for frequency response or contingency reserve, like what you see Rocky Mountain Power doing. That unlocking that potential and being able to use a VPP for the way that your grid operators need real time, I think is why VPPs matter. So, on that point of how utilities are, where utilities are and their own unique use cases for VPPs, I really like GridWise Alliance's maturity model that they came up with in their most recent grid investments to support FERC 2222 report. It was just released at the beginning of this year. What I really like is it shows that journey that a utility can be on in terms of how they're rolling out their VPPs and just generally where they are with their DERs. So you could be at the accommodate stage. You personally could be investing and deploying assets onto your system to make sure that DERs like solar don't backfeed onto your system. Your customers are allowed to interconnect. You're not really utilizing them. You can see that they're there, but they're just connected to your system. You could be at the integrate stage where you're starting to think about, how can I communicate? How can I talk with these devices? How can I start to use them for demand response? Or you could be in the transact stage where you're fully utilizing DERs to participate in a wholesale market and you're realizing the full value of DERs. Rocky Mountain Power is currently doing this and they're bidding in their demand response programs into CAISO, from what I understand. And they're using that as a resource for their system. So depending on where you're at in your maturity for your virtual power plant, you might be at the very early stages of just thinking about how you integrate it into your distribution system plans or how you integrate it into your integrated resource plans. You could be at the software stage where you're thinking about communication devices, you're thinking about installing smart inverters, communication devices that allow you to start to operate these, like your ADMS or DERM systems, leveraging GIS to know where they are on the system. Or you could be in the hardware phase where you are starting to think about AMI metering, having your sub-metering for DERs, or having smart inverters. I'm really interested at the intersection of all of those things. In my career, I've really been focused on how do you utilize and plan for DERs, just not as a customer program, but on the distribution side. And so I've been fortunate enough to be able to work with Berkeley Lab on this new case study called Factors Driving Successful VPP Deployment. We're hoping to have it ready at the end of this year for publication. It's a interview case study approach. We have 3 utilities right now, little plug. We're looking for more people to interview as part of this process. So if you're interested, please see me afterwards. We really want to draw upon lessons learned and best practices from policymakers, regulators, solution providers, utilities, to figure out what are the next set of things that we need to do to scale VPPs. Are they policies? Is it new hardware? Is it new structures for utility business models? What are those things? We've grouped the report around 5 main themes: how you design and deploy your VPP, grid planning and operations, policy and regulation, your regulatory environment, your business model, and then factors that are driving success. So what that looks like is, what is your program design? What's your recruitment strategies? How are you developing cost benefit analysis for your VPP? Thinking about how you actually use VPP as a resource. I think that's the key in my mind, is not just having a program that you call because you have a tariff and you're able to call it during summer months, but a program that you're able to call real time when grid operators need it. So very interested in that component of the grid services and how you operate on the grid. And then what are the barriers and opportunities to scaling VPPs? So our 3 case studies that we have, we've interviewed 2, Rocky Mountain Power and Portland General Electric in March, and we'll be interviewing Puget Sound Energy in April. So Puget Sound Energy has this kind of North Star vision of developing a VPP platform that's plug and play, that's really allowing any DER aggregator to come to their system and integrate to their system really quickly. They didn't start off with huge programs and a bunch of demand response. They started off with thinking, what do we need to scale VPPs and how do we do that? And that was really focused on making sure that they had the software components for people to come and work with them. So they currently are looking about 100 megawatts by 2025, but they have high aspirational goals to get. And I'm going to confirm this in April, but from what I can see, on the magnitude of, 1,500 megawatts and, by 2040. So it's pretty big goal. Rocky Mountain Power, I really like what Rocky Mountain Power is doing because they've been doing essentially what is called a VPP for decades. They've had their AC load control program known as Coolkeeper, which has over 200 megawatts of demand response that they've been calling for frequency response for years now. Their grid operators actually have visibility and access to control those devices, and they're leveraging in that. That program doesn't really get talked about because everybody's really excited about their battery program with Stonin, but their Cool Keeper program and the success of that program is what led them to be able to scale demand response to where it is today. So they have a pilot program, Soleil Lofts, that they had launched for about a year, and then they developed it into a full-scale program. And that's led to 2 new programs, the WattSmart battery program and then their EV battery program. And if you're not familiar with Rocky Mountain Power, they're across 3 states, primarily in Utah, but also Idaho and Wyoming. And then the last case study that we have, which I really like, is Portland General Electric. They are building a VPP platform that is layering on their ADMS and DERMS. And they're doing that to take lessons learned from their smart grid testbed, which they deployed 4 megawatts, 4 megawatt VPP through. And they're leveraging all of these different programs that they have. They had, I don't know, something like 10 different demand response programs that they've been piloting for the last several years that they're now rolling into their VPP. And they have an aspirational goal to meet 25% of their peak demand. So very, very big goal, which goes to about 2,000 megawatts by 2030. They also, I think it's important to note, they do have a decarbonization goal to get to 80% clean energy by 2030 and 100% by 2040. So they have some regulatory and policy pressures there that are going to be accelerating that timeline for them, I think. So that was pretty fast, wasn't it? I was told I had 15 minutes originally, and then someone dropped out. So I just want to point that out. So next, we're kicking it over to
Ryan.
Ryan.
So, yeah, Thank you, Angela, and apologies that I didn't do a proper intro as I was kind of trying to get to your slides over here. So Angela is the CEO of Rockcress Consulting. So thank you very much, Angela. And next up, we have Brian Hledik, who is a principal with the Brattle Group. So give me 1 second to switch the sharing application.
Great. Well, thank you for the introduction, Obadiah. I'll just start by apologizing for the weather. On my way in, I'm coming from Portland, Oregon, and on my way in, my Uber driver accused me of bringing the rain to Tucson. It's been raining for the last 8 months in Oregon, and apparently the showers we've had are all my fault. So the good news is he told me it doesn't last for more than a day or two, so I'm sure it'll be sunny again soon. What I'm going to be talking about today is a study that we released last year, looking specifically at the economics of using virtual power plants to provide capacity or resource adequacy. So Obadiah, raised some of the really important questions that we need to be thinking about when we're deploying virtual power plants and building that resource. Angela talked about what a VPP is, why it matters, and how we build it up. And now I'm going to talk specifically about why this makes sense from an economic standpoint, and then what we need to do to overcome some barriers to further deployment. So I think Angela gave a great overview of what a VPP is. And with these slides, I'm just going to reinforce a couple of the points that she was making with the way we've defined it. So we have defined a virtual power plant as a portfolio of distributed energy resources that are actively controlled to provide benefits to the power system, to consumers, and to the environment. And so what you're seeing in the green box on the left-hand side of this slide is just different examples of distributed energy resources that you're all familiar with. Smart thermostats, distributed batteries, a lot of the technologies that Angela was just discussing. When I've presented this slide, one of the questions I've gotten from some people is, why isn't energy efficiency part of this definition? Like if you can get the same peak demand reductions from energy efficiency that you can get from controlling a battery or controlling a customer's air conditioner, why wouldn't you also consider that part of a virtual power plant? And I think that's a great question and a great point to be raised. I think it's important not to get too hung up on kind of precise definitions of virtual power plants. Really what we're talking about here is what Angela was just saying, trying to harness all of this latent untapped potential that we have on the demand side, the customer side of the meter, and leverage that to provide new services to the power grid. So these distributed energy resources would be controlled by the utility or the aggregator. Obviously, you need technology and software in place that will enable that. And through that control, the idea is that these DERs will be managed in a way that will provide power system benefits. If that's done effectively, what we should see is that power system costs are reduced and emissions are reduced. Those tend to be the two overarching goals of the development of any virtual power plant. And then ultimately, depending on the business model that's in place for monetizing this virtual power plant, hopefully the goal is that those costs are going to be shared with consumers. And in a lot of cases, virtual power plant business models, particularly with regulated utilities, are being set up in a way that the bulk of those cost savings would be paid back to the participants in the form of participation incentive payments, but also a portion of the cost savings could accrue to all ratepayers, to non-participants in this program as well, so that the virtual power plant really becomes a resource that's used to advance affordability goals at a time when the cost of electricity is increasing. So this is a really important time for us all to be talking about and thinking about virtual power plants and how we make all of this happen, because there are a number of different drivers that are converging to really take us to this point where VPP potential could be realized and the capacity could take off. The cost of distributed energy resources like rooftop solar, batteries, electric vehicles is coming down pretty dramatically. We're seeing a lot of technological advancement, particularly when it relates to the software and the algorithms that are needed to manage all of these distributed energy resources in an orchestrated way. The Inflation Reduction Act is going to further reduce the price of a lot of these technologies. FERC Order 2222 was rolled out with the potential to incorporate distributed energy resources into wholesale markets. We're seeing, obviously growing model availability, particularly with electric vehicles. And then ultimately, kind of behind all of this is the decarbonization imperative that's driving so much change in the industry right now. And in addition to that, as I was just saying a minute ago, this isn't just about figuring out how to decarbonize the power grid, but figuring out how to do that affordably. And I think that's really where we're going to see virtual power plants coming in. This is the only resource that we have on the power grid where we're paying customers to provide these grid services. And that's a really important, I think, valuable aspect of virtual power plants. So the boxes that you're seeing on the right, those are just different analyst forecasts of the level of kind of national growth and adoption of distributed energy resources that are expected between now and 2030. I think what we saw in this review is that DER adoption will increase by between 3 times and 10 times what we have on the grid today. And what you saw from Obadiah a minute ago is that those can even be conservative assumptions, right? In Sacramento, they're looking at a 50x increase in battery adoption. So really an inflection point when you think about where we are with respect to customers buying these technology. So we have seen, we do have an expectation that resource adequacy needs are going to persist in the US. Looking back over the last decade, about $120 billion has been spent on generation capacity that is intended primarily to provide this resource adequacy service. As you can see in the chart on the right, that has primarily been gas capacity historically, but we're increasingly seeing utilities investing in utility scale batteries for that purpose as well. The need for resource adequacy has been driven by electrification-related load growth, coal retirements, growing dependence on renewables, which are a great form of clean energy, but not really capacity. And even since we published this report, expectations around load growth due to development of new second generation, AI data centers, new clean energy jobs that are being driven, clean manufacturing development that's being driven by federal policy. Those are even contributing to a further growth in demand for electricity and a further need for a variety of resources that can help us serve that need. So with this study, we really set out to answer two questions. The first is, can virtual power plants reliably serve this resource adequacy need the way a gas peaker or a battery can? And then secondly, can they compete economically with those gas peakers and with those batteries? So knowing that this is a more technical audience, I will spend a couple minutes just talking about how we modeled the dispatch of virtual power plants when it came to analyzing their ability to provide resource adequacy. And the example I'll use here is electric vehicle home charging load management. So the chart you're seeing on the right-hand side of the slide, the dashed line is showing you the average home charging load profile across a fleet of light-duty electric vehicles in utility service territory. And then the solid teal line is showing you how that charging load profile changes in the aggregate once it's enrolled in this virtual power plant program. And there are a bunch of different considerations that go into modeling this that all kind of relate to how we ensure that the customer's level of service and comfort and convenience is being maintained when they enroll in this new virtual power plant program. So the first is there are limits on the number of interruptions or load shifting events that a customer is willing to tolerate. In the case of electric vehicles, we've assumed that you could do this on a daily basis as long as that electric vehicle is charged and ready to go when the customer needs it in the morning. With something like smart thermostat-based air conditioning load control, you can't mess with the customer's air conditioner on a daily basis or they'll drop out. So there we've limited that assumption to something more like 15 events per season. We've limited the load impacts to actual available load during system peak hours. So in this case, we're actually finding that it makes sense to curtail that EV charging load at the time when it's peaking, because that tends to align with the utility system peak. But what we've seen in some other utility jurisdictions is there's actually a misalignment between when you need the demand reduction and when customers are plugging in and charging their electric vehicles at home. So when you think about the potential in an EV managed charging VPP program, you need to account for the fact that not everyone has their EV plugged in and charging at the same time. We account for event opt-outs. So you can see that teal line doesn't drop all the way down to 0. We aren't assuming that every single electric vehicle customer who's participating in this program is having their EV load reduced to 0. Customers in virtual power plant programs typically do have that opportunity to opt out of events, and so we've accounted for that here as well. We've accounted for pre and post-event load building. This isn't an energy conservation program. We're not reducing the EV charging load, we're just shifting it to different times of day. And then lastly, our dispatch simulations are primarily focused on understanding how VPPs can be used to provide resource adequacy, but we are also looking at other economic benefits that these resources can provide. And so what we're showing with this new chart that popped up on the screen here is how the curtailment or the shifting of this charging load also can align with times when energy prices are high or marginal emissions rates are higher, so that we're accounting for some of those benefits in the dispatch logic as well. So after we've taken into account all those different important operational constraints that you need to think about when you're simulating a VPP's operation, what I'm showing on this slide now is what that actually resulted in terms of changes in the utility's net system load shape. So just when we set up this analysis, we constructed a mid-sized utility that generally has characteristics that are representative of a lot of utilities in the US. Where we needed to make some geography-specific assumptions, we based those on kind of the Rocky Mountain West. So this is a utility with 1.7 million customers, and we did assume that this is a decarbonizing utility. So this is a utility that by 2030 would be getting about half of its overall energy needs met from wind and solar. So with that as context, we constructed our VPP and composed it of 4 different technologies that are commercially available today. That is behind meters that are batteries that are behind the meter of residential homes, EV managed charging, as I was just discussing a minute ago, smart or grid interactive electric water heating, and then smart thermostats that are being used to control cooling as well as electric heating to the extent that that's applicable. And so what you're seeing in this chart is the impact on our utilities net load shape on the peak net load day. So that's their gross load minus output from wind and solar. The solid blue line is the net load before the VPP was dispatched, and then the dashed orange line is the net load after the VPP was dispatched. And then those colored segments of the chart are just showing you each different technology's contribution to the overall impact of the VPP. So there are a couple things for me to highlight here. The first is this VPP, as we constructed it, was able to provide a 400 megawatt reduction in demand during any hour that would be required for that to be the outcome over the course of the entire peak day. And then the second thing to note is this isn't, again, just a demand reduction. We also see that some of that load is being shifted into the middle of the day when a utility like this one might otherwise be needing to curtail output from solar because of conditions related to excess supply. So this is just the snapshot for the peak day, but this isn't the only day that matters, right? Even if we clip the peak by 400 megawatts on the peak demand day, there are other days of the year that you're also going to need to be able to operate this VPP in order to ensure that peak demand has been reduced by 400 megawatts across the entire year. So we found to actually provide a 400 megawatts of resource adequacy, the VPP would need to be able to operate in both the summer and the winter. It would need to be able to operate during 7 different months of the year for 63 hours of the year. And in the case of the net peak load day that we're looking at here, the VPP would need to be able to run for 7 consecutive hours in order to give you that 400 megawatt demand reduction. And that's feasible based on all of the different operational constraints that I was just describing. But that's a different and more active and more involved approach to utilizing demand side resources than we've typically had to rely on in the past, where we've thought of demand response as more of an emergency backup type of resource. So that kind of shows you how you get 400 megawatts of resource adequacy from VPPs. And now I'll spend a little time talking about the economics and whether doing that is more economically attractive than building a gas peak or building utility scale battery. So the first chart that I'm showing you is what we consider to be, as we framed it in this analysis, the costs and benefits of building a new gas peaker for this utility and getting 400 megawatts of resource adequacy from that gas peaker. So the first bar, the dark blue bar, these are the annualized costs, primarily CapEx, fuel, and O&M costs associated with building and running this gas peaker. The benefits come primarily in the form of energy and ancillary services benefits. If you're adding a new gas peaker to your system, it'll provide resource adequacy. It'll also provide you some energy benefits because it's going to displace or offset the need to run older, less efficient, dirtier power plants that would otherwise be running on the system. So there is an energy benefit associated with this new gas peaker. And then ultimately what you're left with is the net cost of the peaker, that annualized cost minus those energy and ancillary services benefits. That's about $43 million per year in this case. And that's typically referred to as net cone in industry terminology. So those are the economics of getting 400 megawatts of capacity from gas peakers. Then we went through the same exercise looking at utility scale batteries. Here you can see that the cost of getting 400 megawatts from utility scale batteries is a little bit higher, but we're seeing for this utility system that we've modeled that the energy and ancillary services benefits are greater. Basically, the economics of the battery on this system work such that it's running more frequently, charging and discharging more frequently, and providing a greater energy and ancillary services benefit to the system as a result. So in this case, the economics of the battery look better than those of the gas peaker, but you're still paying $29 million a year to get that capacity benefit, that reliability benefit from the battery. So then the question is, how does the VPP compare to these two options? And the picture looks pretty different. The first thing that probably jumps out at you is that dark blue bar on the VPP side of the chart is lower than that of the gas peak or the utility scale battery. There's just less money that needs to go in to developing 400 megawatts of VPP capacity from the utility's perspective. Now, those costs are different. Those costs are primarily incentive payments that are being paid to participants in these programs rather than capital expenditure that's being used to go out and build the infrastructure. But overall, the costs are lower. The other important thing that jumps out from this chart is there are a lot more colors on the benefits bar. And that's because when you have VPPs that are located closer to the customer, they can provide a broader range of benefits to the power system than when you have a generator that's sitting further from the customer and connected to the transmission system. So we included in this analysis that you're looking at here, the emissions benefits associated with reducing carbon emissions valued at a social cost of carbon that I think we assumed was $100 per ton. There's also very small resilience benefit. And then there is also the potential, if the VPP is configured correctly and being operated in the necessary way, the potential to provide transmission and distribution deferral benefits as well from the VPP. And when you stack up all of those different potential value streams and optimize the dispatch of the VPP to provide those benefits, what you're left with is a net cost of only $2 million per year from the VPP. So pretty attractive from an economics standpoint. Now, just to give you some sense of scale, again, this was just looking at 400 megawatts for one utility. We wanted to just think about, okay, what would this be if this were more of a deployment of VPPs at a national scale? So RMI has estimated that by 2030, we potentially could have 60 gigawatts of VPP capacity. If we reach that scale, what we found is that VPPs could save about $15 to $35 billion in resource costs relative to the conventional alternatives over a 10-year period. And that's just avoiding resource costs, meaning just avoiding the types of costs that are reflected in your utility bill: generation, transmission, and distribution. If we also include the societal benefits of reductions in carbon emissions, that adds another $20 billion of benefits, societal benefits over that 10-year period. So pretty striking findings from an economic standpoint. I know I'm running fairly short on time, so I won't spend a lot of time on this slide. We ran something like a dozen different sensitivity cases to try and understand how robust this finding was relative to different assumptions about avoided T&D costs and VPP operations and things like that. And what we found is there are a couple pretty interesting takeaways from that sensitivity analysis. So the chart that you're seeing here is showing the net benefits, kind of the third bar in each of the three sections of the chart. And then the range is the kind of high and low value from the sensitivity cases. So the first thing that we found is, depending on your assumptions about the trajectory of future cost declines, particularly as it relates to battery costs, there is a crossover point where utility scale batteries could be economically favorable to VPPs. And it's just kind of a question of how those conditions exist for a given market. And then in addition to that, the thing that really struck me is there is actually, under certain plausible market conditions, a scenario where the net cost of getting 400 megawatts of resource adequacy from a VPP is negative, meaning all those other benefits on the chart actually outweigh the cost of the VPP, and you're essentially getting resource adequacy for free. Our sensitivities around T&D costs and how you value carbon emissions were the strongest drivers of that finding. So there are a lot of other benefits of VPPs that we didn't model in this study. I think one that I want to highlight that has become pretty important recently is VPPs don't face the same types of interconnection delays that we see from large-scale transmission-connected resources. You can essentially build a VPP as quickly as customers adopt technology and sign up to these programs. They aren't faced with potentially multi-year, 5-year delays of working their way through the interconnection queue and then getting connected to the system. So when we're looking at a scenario with really fast, really rapid load growth, and potentially the inability of supply side resources to keep up with that level of load growth, VPPs can fill a really important gap by coming online quickly and allowing those new sources of load to be brought into the system faster. Also, just want to spend a minute talking about what we see as being the ideal conditions for VPP deployment. You know, it's easy for a consultant, especially an economist, to kind of come up and say, here's the opportunity, now kind of go figure out how this is all going to work. But there are a lot of reasons why we aren't seeing this level of adoption, this level of deployment happening today. There are barriers that exist in the market. So from a market design standpoint, you know, we do need to see wholesale markets providing a level playing field for demand side resources like VPPs. We need retail rates and programs that are new and innovative and incentivize customers to participate in this program, because we can get the technology right, we can get the market designs right, we can get the incentives right. But if customers are concerned that this is a risk, that this is something that's going to inconvenience them, if it's not really easy to sign up and participate without even thinking about it, then customers aren't going to be interested in enrolling. So that's a huge consideration when it comes to actually realizing this potential. We also need technology innovation. You know, DERs need to become widely available and affordable, be able to communicate with each other. And then we need the algorithms that will allow us to not just communicate with the DERs, but also orchestrate and optimize their management in a way that will provide all of the grid services that I'm just describing. And when you think about operating a single resource or a portfolio of resources to simultaneously provide distribution level benefits, transmission benefits, and resource adequacy, all while maintaining customer comfort, that is a really complex decision-making process that needs to be built into these dispatch algorithms. It's not an easy one to solve. And so we definitely need to see progress, and are seeing progress on the software that's being used for that purpose. Policy support helps a lot. You know, codes and standards to promote deployment of flexible end uses, R&D funding to support the removal of key technical barriers. We've seen the DOE loan programs office and Jiggershaw in particular really excited about VPPs. That type of support is very helpful, both at the federal level and the state level. And then lastly, the regulatory framework. From my perspective, I always come back to this as the number one barrier. We need the utilities financial model to be aligned with the opportunity. And until that happens, there's always going to be a challenge getting particularly regulated investor-owned utilities to really pursue this opportunity to its fullest. Once we figure that piece of the puzzle out, I think we're going to start seeing VPPs more fully reflected in utility resource plans and M&V types of, or cost effectiveness types of analyses. It's different for a muni, a co-op, public power. Incentives there are different. I think there we're maybe facing more of some of the kind of technical challenges and system challenges. But when we talk about making investor-owned utilities part of this, we really need to align those incentives. So I know I'm out of time. I'll end here with just a quick pitch to any of you who haven't seen the report already. It's available on our website. Definitely encourage you to check it out for more detail. There's a 30-page, very nerdy technical appendix that we wrote, not just for ourselves, but for those of you in this room as well. So encourage you to look at that. And it has a few kind of concluding recommendations for steps that we think could be taken now to really start to take advantage of this opportunity. A jurisdiction-specific market potential study is really important. The results that I just showed, we think are pretty robust, but the opportunity, the use cases for developing and deploying VPPs, that's going to change from one market to the next. And so really understanding that at a market-specific level is important. Pilots are great, but don't stop there. When pilots are being developed, develop it assuming the pilot will succeed and with an accompanying plan to scale once the pilot has completed. And also use that pilot to test some of these regulatory business models, financial incentive mechanisms that I was describing. And then lastly, we do need to take a closer look at the policies that we have for valuing VPPs and making sure that those comprehensively account for the value. So with that, I'll stop there, but look forward to fielding any questions at the end.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ryan. Right. And next up, and I think This is easy here.
Hmm.
All right, perfect. So thank you very much, Ryan. Our last speaker of the session is Elaine Hale. She's a senior research engineer with NREL.
Thank you, Obadiah. Like Angela, I'm at the beginning of a project on VPPs rather than at the end. So I want to provide some kind of framing thoughts about VPPs, and I want to specifically talk about participation models. And I want to pose the question, what is the objective? So first, just a quick definition from the DOE Loan Office. The DOE Loan Office takes a pretty broad view of what a VPP is. VPPs enroll DER owners in providing grid services. They also are of the opinion that traditional demand response is a VPP. So we already have gigawatts of quote unquote VPPs, but they are also recognizing a lot of the devices we've already been talking about in this session, like EV charging and how we can shift the time when that happens, and behind the meter solar plus storage systems, and talk about these kind of deeper forms of control that we think about with VPPs. So I want to step back a second and give you a little bit of a personal anecdote. So I'm a systems engineer. Some of you might also consider yourselves systems engineers, but systems engineers are all about controls and optimization. And in the early 2010s or so, I was a younger researcher at NREL, and I would get invited to lots of DER control workshops. And I would sit in these workshops and just come to the conclusion that based on both my training and what the speakers were saying, we can make distributed energy resources do whatever we want. There's lots of smart control engineers. They can come up with the algorithms. And if you give them enough information and communications, they can make these things do what they want. But what I would find myself thinking in those workshops pretty quickly and for the rest of the time while I was sitting there was, well, what's the objective? What do we want these things to do? And so that really became my key driving question here. And I think the reason that that question was so persistent and why I was perceiving that these speakers weren't really addressing it is because the questions that are posed by DERs they can't be boiled down to a single optimization problem. It's not one objective. It's not even multiple objectives. These problems are multiple stakeholder problems. And there's a bunch of stakeholders involved and they all have multiple objectives. And so it's really hard to say what should be happening with DERs in any one particular circumstance. So this is just a snapshot of some of the stakeholders on the supply side. And all these stakeholders on the supply side, from the independent power producer to the utility company to the aggregator, they're all about supplying electricity. But some of these details about whether they're maximizing profits or maximizing the market surplus, like an ISO is doing, these details and the specific kind of requirements that these stakeholders are subject to really end up impacting what actually gets built on the system, how much it costs, and who pays for it. And then we have the demand side. And it's just really important to always remember that the primary objective of a utility customer is not really to be a utility customer. It's just to use energy when we want to use it. When we're using electricity, we don't really want to be thinking about that electricity use at all. We, as power system planners and researchers, we think of set and forget as something we don't really like. But I think actually the whole idea of a set and forget mentality is really a great value to society, and we should be encouraging that. We want people to not be worrying about their electric bills and exactly when they should be running which appliance. We want people to be supporting their kids, going to see their friends, making meaningful things happen at work, not thinking about their energy use and their energy bills. So, the ideal would be that energy is really cheap and the technology works really well and nobody has to think about it. But of course we do think about it, and we we kind of turn to the regulator to be this go-between between the demand side and the supply side. The regulator kind of embodies these adjectives that we all want to be true about our electricity system. We want our systems to be safe, reliable, and affordable. And when we look at this whole picture, we think, well, the demand side could probably contribute more to helping us realize this overall vision. But how do we do that? It's actually challenging. So finding the intersection of all of these trade-offs and these different stakeholder goals can actually be difficult. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have all of these different demand side participation mechanisms that have really proliferated, because we need to find the right trade-off between making it easier for customers to participate and valuable for them to participate, and then making sense on the grid side. Basically, any kind of mechanism that doesn't both reduce grid costs and reduce customer bills isn't going to persist for the long term. And we also have to think about whether the costs outweigh the benefits. And we really have to think about all the different costs. So there are the physical costs of enabling demand flexibility. We've already been hearing about information flows and controllers, and that requires some physical build out. But we also have opportunity costs, transaction costs, attentional costs. Is it worth it to the people who need to decide to participate? Is it worth their time? We have to make that be an easy call, because if it takes too much time and attention, people aren't going to do it. So I just want to think about these kinds of trade-offs in two parts. First, just a really quick reminder about traditional power systems and how these trade-offs have always worked. And then part two, looking more at some of the emerging trends that we've already been talking about. So in traditional power systems, we're all kind of familiar. You have central power plants, you have a utility, there's some rates, there's customers. It's a very linear system. It's not terribly complicated. But even in that case, we've had demand response and demand participation for decades and decades now, first coming online with things like interruptible rates, demand charges, time of use rates, energy efficiency. These things can lower overall grid costs and kind of be valuable to both the participants and non-participants alike. And then if we think maybe about the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of elaborations on these themes, just getting more into different kinds of ways of engaging load. We have direct load control of air conditioners. We've had some wholesale demand response programs. We've had sort of more robust energy efficiency programs run by utilities and by third parties. And we've seen things like critical peak pricing be introduced as new kinds of rate structures that can also elicit these kinds of responses that we want to see. But all of these ways to participate, both in the past and the future, happen in a context of the grid services that are being provided by the loads. So I think it's always good to kind of keep in mind these rules of thumb of what these grid services are worth. And I think we've seen a little bit of that today, but we always see this at ESIG, it's great. But just as a reminder that capacity is worth tens to maybe hundreds of dollars per kilowatt year. Average energy costs on the wholesale market are a few cents per kilowatt hour. We do see variation in energy costs in our wholesale markets, and fairly regularly, let's say, maybe costs can get up to 10 cents per kilowatt hour, and then in extreme conditions they can get up to up into dollars per kilowatt hour. But those are kind of infrequent periods. And then the other big kinds of costs that we can defer using demand side resources are distribution and transmission. So then we need to put those grid service values against the cost of demand response. And this is a graph that I've borrowed from Lawrence Berkeley from their California Demand Response Potential Study. We have levelized cost of shed type demand response, so peak load reduction type demand response on the y-axis. We have cumulative capacity on the x-axis. But this is kind of a typical shape that you might see. First, there's some kinds of demand that's low value. So sometimes there's some industrial load that is lower value, and so it's just not going to consume electricity at modestly high prices. This isn't a perfect example, but I'm thinking of aluminum production. For aluminum production, electricity is a really big input to that process. And so there's a specific kind of strike price above which it doesn't really make sense for the aluminum company to keep making aluminum, because it's the cost of the electricity has exceeded the value they're going to get from the product that's being sold. So there's some kinds of loads that are like that are easy to access. But a lot of loads, to get participation, there's the costs I was talking about. There's the physical cost, but there's also, what do I need to pay someone so that they're willing to participate? If I keep paying them more, I'll get more people willing to sign up. But the kicker is just that there is a ceiling set by the price at which the supply side can deliver the same resource. And so there's always this kind of ceiling on how much demand response you're actually going to get. Okay, so that's kind of the basics from that traditional power system point of view, and those basics still apply. But as we talk about at ESIG, we're looking at very different kinds of future power systems. So I just want to highlight a couple trends that, again, are big themes here. So first, we have some new potential opportunities for demand side resources presented by curtailment, which is real. And this is just a quick plot from CAISO, taken from their website, just showing how amounts of curtailment have been growing since 2015. And then this is a chart from my colleague's 2035 study showing that at really high shares of renewable energy, when we're looking at 100% clean scenarios, curtailment kind of expands to become more of a seasonal mismatch phenomenon, where there's periods in the year where we need to use a lot of those dispatchable resources, which are shown here in red. And so those really represent opportunities for reducing load. But then those are coupled with, there's times of high curtailment where there's opportunities to increase load. And, you know, we see, like I said, we see those now with curtailment. We see that maybe the exact shape of that phenomenon might change as we add more renewables. In any case, there's more opportunities for load shifting. And then what we've really been focused on in this panel is that there are, I'll just call them, in the lingo these days, distributed energy resources. There's different technologies that people are adopting. And really, if we want to highlight the residential sector, people are adopting PV and behind the meter storage, EVs, and heat pumps. But again, I want to emphasize that people aren't first and foremost adopting these technologies in order to provide grid services for everyone. They're adopting them to benefit themselves. You know, even if we're talking about the solar PV and the behind the meter storage, people might, you know, people want the grid to be reliable, but mostly they want their home to be reliable. They want the power to be there if there's an outage, and they also want this investment to pay off for them. That said, there really is a lot of promise for virtual power plants to aggregate these resources together and to make them greater than the sum of their parts, but it has to pay off for that original owner that adopted these technologies in the first place. So there have been a number of virtual power plant pilots happening around the globe. I think one of the key features of them is that they have all featured behind the meter storage and typically solar plus storage. And I think another thing that I've seen looking at a few of these, I'm highlighting here the Australian energy market operator VPP demonstrations, which have actually been done for a few years, but I really appreciated their final report. Angela was talking about the 3 different stages of integrating DERs, and I really feel like this report was in that middle integration stage, not quite fully using all of the resources, but showing this transitional snapshot of integrating these kinds of resources into their system. But in any case, this pilot and, for instance, the pilot going on in ERCOT right now, they feature solar plus storage, and they also feature a wide range of companies. So it's not just one company or 2 companies or 3 companies that are providing these services. I think both of those pilots in particular had 7 or 8 participants, and they were all run by different companies. So I thought that was a really interesting thing to see, that it's not super concentrated. And then I also just wanted to highlight from this report, like I said, it was, I think, a really interesting snapshot of that integration phase of DERs, where the virtual power plants were mostly providing contingency reserves. They were allowed to earn money by dispatching against the real-time price, but they weren't really doing it. And also they weren't really visible, and they definitely weren't dispatched by the market at all. And so it's that middle stage, and that report does a really good job highlighting about how there's need to just continually improve forecasting, and then also to continually improve visibility, and then move toward full participation in the markets. And then I also really appreciated, this is a particular example of one device operating in this VPP, and it just shows how complex the algorithms can be, and how complex the need to forecast different things happening can be. So we're looking at a battery dispatch plot where there's 3 different things going on. So the first thing is that the voltage, which is the yellow line, has gone high. And so the battery begins providing reactive power, which is the orange line. At the same time, the battery is providing contingency response, but to provide the contingency response at the purple line, it's only at the green line because of that reactive power provision happening to satisfy the distribution system constraints. And then the battery is also discharging for a third reason that wasn't really explained. And so I think this really highlights how there can be challenges to forecast what a VPP is going to do. For instance, here, the VPP operator would want to get better and better at being able to forecast what the actual contingency response is going to be in the face of distribution constraints that they might hit. And, this particular VPP operator was prioritizing first the distribution operation, so that volt-var control, and then the contingency response, and then anything else happening with this battery was after that. So I think there's just a lot of practical need to work through all of those issues for different use cases that is going on and will continue to go on. I've also been struck by some things that have also struck the other panelists here, that what VPPs can do is really bounded by their regulatory environment. So as I said, there's many companies running VPPs, but if you get a moment, the Tesla website actually has a lot of information on their VPPs. It's quite educational, and I pulled this example from there that the Tesla VPPs are built around their power walls and solar, mostly solar in their power walls. And so it's the same equipment everywhere in the country, but what that equipment can be used to do depends on where you are. So for instance, in ERCOT, Tesla is running a VPP pilot. And the way that works is Tesla, to participate, you actually have to sign up with Tesla as your retail electricity provider. And then they both provide ancillary services and do some energy arbitrage in the ERCOT market. But if you have that same equipment in PG&E territory, the only thing you can do is respond to a demand response event. And so again, just what can happen is really bounded by that regulatory and market structure. And finally, I just want to highlight that there are a lot of different participation mechanisms that are possible for DERs or for VPPs, and which one makes sense depends on those trade-offs between the costs and the benefits for everybody involved. So this was just from a study some colleagues and I finished about a year and a half ago, where we looked at time of use rates compared to real-time price, compared to direct load control. And, you know, it's not immediately clear which one you should deploy when, because they have their benefits and their challenges. So, you know, time of use rates are least costly to implement, but they had the least value. The real-time price response had the most value at a low number of participants, but it's a question of whether the response can be fully automated. Again, as a control engineer, I feel like the response should be automated, but I was talking to somebody who does EV shifting, and when they think about real-time prices, they think about looking at the real-time price on your phone and telling your car whether to charge by poking at your phone. To me, that doesn't sound very sustainable. But again, control engineers could make it happen. And then we have like direct load control, which can really sustain the value for high shares of participation, but is more costly to implement and is more like the VPP model. So to wrap up, I just want to say that we are doing a modeling project where we are modeling all these stakeholders that are involved at the same time and looking at those interactions directly. So please stay tuned to hear how that goes. We are focusing on residential customers with PV, battery energy storage, electric vehicles. We're going to be comparing vertically integrated utility structures with independent power producer structures. And we're going to be looking at the impacts on DER adoption and operations when they're just responding to a retail tariff or when they're in a more active program. And Obadiah, we will be looking at the interaction of those two things too. So we're excited about getting that work complete. And with that, I will end. Please come find me and chat if you're interested to talk more. This one project is about residential customers, but I do have another project where we're looking at industrial customers. So happy to talk about industrial customer participation as well. Thank you.